Welcome back to part 4 of the interesting narrative of the life of Olaudah Equiano, written in 1789. I'll continue. I hope the reader will not think I've trespassed on his patience in introducing myself to him with some account of the manners and customs of my country. They had been implanted in me with great care, and made an impression on my mind, which time could not erase, and which all the adversity and variety of fortune I have since experienced served only to rivet and record. For whether the love of one's country be real or imaginary, or a lesson of reason or an instinct of nature, I shall look back with pleasure on the first scenes of my life, though that pleasure has been for the most part mingled with sorrow. I've already acquainted the reader with the time and place of my birth. My father, besides having many slaves, had a numerous family, of which 7 lived to grow up, that's children, including myself and my sister, who was the only daughter. As I was the youngest of the sons, I became, of course, the greatest favorite with my mother, and was always with her. And she used to take particular pains to form my mind. I was trained up from my earliest years in the art of war. My daily exercise was shooting and throwing javelins, and my mother adorned me with emblems, after the manner of our greatest warriors. In this way, I grew up till I turned the age of 11, when an end was put to my happiness in the following manner. Generally, when the grown people in the neighborhood were gone far into the fields to labor, the children assembled together in some of the neighbors' premises to play, and commonly some of us used to get up a tree to look out for any assailant or kidnapper that might come upon us. For they sometimes took those opportunities of our parents' absences to attack and carry off as many as they could seize. One day as I was watching at the top of the tree in one yard, I saw one of those people come into the yard of our next door neighbor, that one to kidnap. There being many stout young men in it, immediately on this I gave the alarm of the rogue, and he was surrounded by the stoutest of them, who entangled him with cords, so that he could not escape, till some of the grown people came and secured him. But alas, ere long it was my fate to be thus attacked, and to be carried off when none of the grown people were nigh. One day, when all our people were gone into their works as usual, and only I and my dear sister were left to mind the house, 2 men and a woman got over our wall, and in a moment seized us both, and without giving us time to cry out or make resistance, they stopped our mouths and ran off with us into the nearest woods. Here they tied our hands and continued to carry us as far as they could, till night came on, when we reached a small house, where the robbers halted for refreshment and spent the night. We were then unbound, but were unable to take any food, and being very overpowered by fatigue and grief, our only relief was some sleep, which allayed our misfortunes for a short time. The next morning we left the house and continued traveling all day. For a long time we kept the woods, but at last we came into a road which I believed I knew. I had now some hopes of being delivered, for we had advanced for a little way before I discovered some people at a distance, on which I began to cry out for their assistance, but my cries had no other effect than to make them tie me faster and stop my mouth, and then they put me into a large sack. They also stopped my sister's mouth and tied her hands, and in this manner we proceeded till we were out of sight of these people. When we went to the rest the following night, they offered us some victuals, but we refused, and the only comfort we had was in being in one another's arms all that night, and bathing each other with tears. But alas, we were soon deprived of even the small comfort of weeping together. The next day proved a day of greater sorrow than I had yet experienced, for my sister and I were then separated, while we laid clasped in each other's arms. It was in vain that we besought them not to part us. She was torn from me and immediately carried away, while I was left in a state of distraction not to be described. I cried and I grieved continually, For several days I did not eat anything but what they forced into my mouth. At length, after many days traveling, during which I had often changed masters, I got into the hands of a chieftain in a very pleasant country. This man had 2 wives and some children, and they all used me extremely well, and they did all they could to comfort me, particularly the first wife, who was something like my mother. Although I was a great many days' journey from my father's house, yet these people spoke exactly the same language with us. The first master of mine, as I may call him, was a smith, and my principal employment was working his bellow, which were the same kind as I had seen in my vicinity. They were in some manner as it's done to pump water out of the cask with a hand pump. I believe it was gold he worked, for it was a lovely bright yellow color, and was worn by the women on their wrists and ankles. I was there, I suppose, about a month, and they at last used to trust me with some little distance from the house. This liberty I used in embracing every opportunity to inquire the way to my own home. I also sometimes, for that same purpose, went with the maidens in the cool of the evening to bring pitchers of water from the spring for the use of the house. I had also remarked where the sun rose in the morning and set in the evening, as I had traveled along, and I observed that my father's house was towards the rising of the sun. I therefore determined to seize the first opportunity of making my escape and to shape the course of that quarter, for I was quite oppressed and weighed down by grief after my mother's and friends, and my love for liberty, ever great, was strengthened by the mortifying circumstances of not daring to eat with the freeborn children, although I was mostly their companion. While I was projecting my escape, one day an unlucky event happened. While feeding some chickens, I happened to toss a small pebble at one of them, which hit it on the middle and directly killed it. The old slave, having soon after missed the chicken, inquired after it, and on relating the accident, for I told her the truth because my mother would never suffer me to tell a lie, she flew into a violent passion, threatened that I should suffer for it, and my master being out, she immediately went and told her mistress what I had done. This alarmed me very much, and I expected an instant flogging, which to me was uncommonly dreadful, for I had seldom been beaten at home. I therefore resolved to fly, and accordingly I ran into the thicket that was hard by, which is nearby, and hid myself in the bushes. Soon afterwards my mistress and the slave returned, and not seeing me, they searched all the house, but not finding me, and I not making answer when they called me, they thought I had run away, and the whole neighborhood was raised in pursuit of me. In that part of the country, as in ours, the house and the villages were skirted with woods or shrubberies, and the bushes were so thick that a man could readily conceal himself in them, so as to elude the strictest search. The neighbors continued the whole day looking for me, and several times many of them came within a few yards of the place where I lay hid. I then gave myself up for lost entirely, and expected every moment when I heard a rustling among the trees to be found out and punished by my master, but they never discovered me, though they were often so near that I even heard their conjectures as they were looking about for me. And I now learned from them that any attempt to return home would be hopeless. Most of them supposed I had fled towards home, but the distance was so great and the way so intricate that I thought I could never reach it, and that I should be lost in the woods. When I heard this, I was seized with a violent panic and abandoned myself to despair. Night too began to approach and aggravated all my fears. I had before entertained hopes of getting home, and I had determined when it should be dark to make the attempt, but I was now convinced it was fruitless, and I began to consider if possible I could escape all other animals. I could not those of the humankind, and that not knowing the way, I must perish in the woods. Thus I was like the hunted deer. Every leaf, every whispering breath conveyed a foe, and every foe a death. I heard frequent rustlings among the leaves, and being pretty sure they were snakes, I expected every instant to be stung by them. This increased my anguish and the horror of my situation, because now it was quite insupportable. I at length quitted the thicket, very faint and hungry, for I had not eaten or drank anything all day, and crept to my master's kitchen, from whence I set out at first, and which was an open shed, and laid myself down in the ashes with an anxious wish for death, to relieve me from all my pains. I was scarcely awake in the morning when the old woman slave, who was the first up, came to light the fire and saw me in the fireplace. She was very much surprised to see me and could scarcely believe her own eyes. She now promised to intercede for me and went for her master, who soon after came, and having slightly reprimanded me, ordered me to be taken care of and not ill-treated. Soon after this, my master's only daughter and child by his first wife sickened and died, which affected him so much that for some time he was almost frantic, and really could have killed himself had he not been watched and prevented. However, in a small time afterwards he recovered, and I was again sold. I was now carried to the left of the sun's rising, through many different countries and a number of large woods. The people I was sold to used to carry me very often when I was tired, either on their shoulders or on their backs. I saw many convenient, well-built sheds along the roads at proper distances to accommodate the merchants and travelers who lay in those buildings, along with their wives, who often accompanied them, and they always go well armed. From the time I left my nation, I always found somebody that understood me till I came to the seacoast. The languages of different nations did not totally differ, nor were they so copious as those of the Europeans, particularly the English. They were therefore easily learned, and while I was journeying thus through Africa, I acquired 2 or 3 different languages. In this manner, I had been traveling for a considerable time, when one evening, to my great surprise, whom should I see brought to the house where I was but my dear sister. As soon as she saw me, she gave me a loud shriek and ran into my arms. I was quite overpowered. Neither of us could speak, but for a considerable time we clung to each other in mutual embraces, unable to do anything but weep. Our meeting affected all who saw us, and indeed I must acknowledge, in honor of those sable destroyers of human rights, that I never met with any ill treatment or saw any offered to their slaves, except tying them when necessary to keep them from running away. And these people knew we were brother and sister. They indulged us together, and the man to whom I was supposed to belong lay with us, he in the middle, while she and I held one another by the hand across his breast all night. And thus for a while we forgot our misfortunes in the joy of being together. But even this small comfort was soon to have an end, for scarcely had the fatal morning appeared when she was again torn from me forever. I was now more miserable, if possible, than before. The small relief which her presence gave me from pain was gone, and the wretchedness of my situation was redoubled by my anxiety after her fate, and my apprehensions lest her sufferings should be greater than mine, when I could not be with her to alleviate them. Yes, thou dear partner of all my childish sports, thou sharer of my joys and sorrows, happy should I have ever esteemed myself to encounter every misery for you, and to procure your freedom by the sacrifice of my own. Though you were early forced from my arms, your image has been always riveted in my heart, from which neither time nor fortune have been able to remove it, so that while the thoughts of your sufferings have dampened my prosperity, they have mingled with adversity and increased its bitterness. To that heaven which protects the weak from the strong, I commit the care of your innocence and virtue, if they have not already received their full reward, and if your youth and delicacy have not long since fallen victims to the violence of the African trader, the pestilent stench of a Guinea ship, the seasoning in the European colonies, or the lash and lust of a brutal and unrelenting overseer. So I'm going to stop here because that was a lot. We see him now, this tender feelings towards people, his sister, his mom. He's only an 11-year-old child. This is a lot to carry. But even though we're seeing this traumatic, sad experience, there's still a little humanity that he's trying to show us among the Africans towards their enslaved. Yes, it is horrible to take children away from their families, but we know it's going to get worse as we continue. So, thank you so much for listening.